Good evening and welcome to our webinar, Death of a Child from Substance-Related Causes. I'm Pat Loader, the Executive Director of the Compassionate Friends. This evening, all attendees are in listen-only mode. To ask a question, you will need to type it into your question area on your screen's control panel. To get to the control panel, click on the arrow on the top right side of your screen. Our presenter this evening is Barbara Allen. Barbara's son Jim died in 2003 from an overdose of heroin and alcohol at the age of 35. Her brother Bill and niece Amanda also died from substance-related causes. She and her husband Tom have been active in the Compassionate Friends, serving in many roles since 2003. Barbara manages an educational program, www.shatterthestigma.com, to help those who suffer the disease and those who love them better understand the complexities of substance issues in today's world. A published author, she is a leadership coach and yoga teacher. Barbara freely distributes her popular wristbands, No Shame or Blame, Just Hope, through her website. Barbara, thank you for being here and presenting this webinar for us.
Well, thank you, Pat. This is exciting and a little nerve-wracking since I've not worked with this software, so I know you're there helping me with all that technical magic stuff, for which I'm very grateful. All right. So a couple of things that I wanted to say, first of all, is I do want to welcome everybody and thank everybody who's participating, listening, hopefully asking questions. I'm going to encourage you to ask questions as we go, and you don't have to wait till the end. We'll see what we can answer and offer as we go. I tend to offer a fair amount of information, so I also want to let you know that copies of the slides are available on my website, so anybody who would like to get to them, you're welcome to them. And so you don't have to make a mad scramble for notes if that's what you're inclined to do. So Pat, what I'd like to do now is ask our participants to access the poll so we have an idea of who's on who's participating, and generally what we're looking for is who has lost somebody to a substance-related issue, who may be a facilitator for a group along this line, or perhaps someone who's wanting to learn to help others. So can we do the poll, Pat?
Okay, to vote in the poll, just simply click on the button.
So Pat, I'm not sure, I can't see if anything's going on, so you have to help me out with that one.
Okay, let's give it just a few more minutes and
Sure.
We'll close the poll and then we'll see the results.
Yeah, it just helps me to understand, be clear on who's on the call. In the years that I've been working or presenting presentations, workshops and such, much of which at Compassionate Friends events, I've really been pleased to see a lot of not only parents and siblings and grandparents who've lost children to substance-related issues, but also people who have not, chapter leaders, facilitators, regional coordinators or board members, or just others who have family and friends who've lost someone in this situation, come into my workshops and thank me for helping them better understand, to better help people. And that's all part of the issues that we have to deal with stigma, shame, guilt, that can often hinder our processes for healing in this journey.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll, Barb.
Okay.
And let me share the results with you. 92% have lost a loved one to substance-related causes. 1% have a friend wanting information to help somebody. 2% would be a meeting facilitator, chapter leader, or someone else in TCF. Professionals, 2%, and other at 3%.
Great. All right. Thank you, Pat. And thank you, everybody, for giving this information. So I want to start, once my system and your systems link up. There we go. So on the previous screen, you saw that I have these titles of CPC or Certified Professional Coach, and I am certified in teaching yoga, and I have other educational background. But what I want to stress at this point for tonight is my friend Greg's term, NCW, no credentials whatsoever. And the purpose of that is to tell you that I'm speaking tonight as a bereaved mother, a bereaved sibling, and a bereaved aunt who has lived through things that you'll be hearing about tonight. What you're going to learn from me is what I've learned, what I've experienced, what I've learned from meeting so many other awesome people, many of which who are on this call and participating from different parts of the country. So that's the basis of this information. You're going to get my opinions. You're going to get some research that I have discovered and learned. And I am not a professional when it comes to drug-related issues. I am just a very curious person. So the main things I want to start with is that the intention of all the work that I do in this area is that those of us who've lost children, siblings, or grandchildren, is that they are not swept under the rug of public scorn and judgment, and that we are not swept along with them. And I know from many talking to people, emails that I've received prior to this webinar, that's often what happens or can happen. I do want us also to be free to love and celebrate and mourn our children in everything that they did, every hope and dream, every moment of laughter, every fabulous meal they produced, every work of art, and really celebrate them and not have to hide behind scorn and ridicule. I love this phrase, to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. It actually was a bumper sticker I found in a tiny place in Yellow Springs, Ohio, a very small place outside of Yellow Springs. I want to tell you a little bit about my stories. I don't want to go into great detail because it would be easy to take up more than an hour, and that's not my point tonight. But essentially, my son Jim died when he was 35, as Pat said. He'd overdosed on heroin and alcohol when he was living in Phoenix. Our journey began in the fall of 1982. So it was about a 22-year battle, and for me it was the disease of addiction. Didn't start out that way. I just wanted him to get fixed. That was my ignorant orientation at the time. I got a phone call from my son's high school telling me he had not been in school for 6 weeks, and I was disturbed, upset that the school hadn't contacted me. Went through his room, found over-the-counter Dexedrine type things from a company in Colorado, called the police. They sent me to the FBI, and I immediately began with my son in some therapeutic environments. So we started this when he was 14. He did go through treatment programs that started that year. We did a lot of things, but my ignorance was tremendous in those years. I had left my marriage to his father because of substance-related issues. I was told that it was only my son who had a problem, that it couldn't be his father or his grandfather in this case, because the grandfather was a general in the military. And as the grandfather said to me, he couldn't be an alcoholic because his parents were Baptists. So when I look back now, I realize how ignorant I was, but also when you think about 1982, the ignorance that existed around substance-related issues. A side note is that in that period of time, in drug treatment programs, often they served wine with meals. A lot of growth and change over the years. We did a lot of therapy. I wanted him fixed. I thought that was just a just say no type of environment. I was blessed to find various support systems. One was a little questionable, and that was a therapist who said to me, the reason your son has behavioral issues and is using substances is because you divorced his father and you work outside the home. That was not helpful, and as it turns out, it was not true. I really began to look for other places to get information. I was learning how basically ignorant people were, and myself as well, of course. So we started Jim's first treatment program when he was 15. He learned a lot about how to beat the system in there, and I learned a lot about how ignorant I was and the issues of codependency. Jim's first round with substances was what they called fruit bowl, where the kids would take things from their parents' medicine cabinets, throw them in a bowl, and just take whatever was there and top it off with a little bit of beer or alcohol. I remember one time going to a tough love meeting, and one of the gifts of those early days was, as I was going in, a very nervous, scared young mom, a really attractive woman who should have been, if she wasn't, on what should I say, a poster gal for a motorcycle calendar. She was gorgeous, knockout, beautiful redhead, jeans painted like spray paint. And she stopped me and she said, are you going into the tough love meeting? And I told her yes. And she told me how she was a recovering heroin addict. And after learning a little bit more about my story, she said, don't ever stop working to save your son's life. This is a lifetime of experience. This is not an overnight thing. And at that time I thought, oh, she must be wrong, but she was right. And it actually set me on a good path, as much as I didn't want to hear what she had to say. As time moved on, Jim had times of sobriety. He had times of falling off the wagon. He'd go back into treatment. The same things that many of you on this call have experienced: the ups, the downs, the goods, the nightmares, the terrors, the excitement, the hope, that whole cycle. There were times as he got older where the substances changed. He went through a period with cocaine. He got scared out of that one and sobered up about 19 years of age. He did very well when he was sober in school and in things that he was learning. He was an avid reader. He loved to read history. He also liked mystery, and Stephen King was his favorite author. So he had times that were really, really great. One of the things that I remember also from this period was being told that I needed to remember that my son's development was stymied at the onset of use of substances. Emotional, perhaps mental, but certainly mature development was hindered. And it was something I was going to come to use a lot in many things I do, to remember that though he might be 19 or he might be 21 or he might be, as he got older, whatever age, that in fact he wasn't emotionally or mature to that age. So I had to treat him age appropriate, not chronological, but emotional. And that served me very well, and it still does today. We went for many, many years, and like I said, there was 6 and 7 years of time when things were really, really good. And unfortunately, in the last 5 years of his life, he was introduced to heroin. And I didn't know it at first. My husband and I then found out. We did interventions. He spent some time in the local jail. And at one point in time, I was sending him books. As I said, he was a reader. And I sent him a book called 100 best jails in America. And I kind of said it tongue-in-cheek, and he called me one day laughing hysterically, and he said, oh, all the guys in here and just think this is the funniest thing in the world. That was really cool. And I have to say one thing about my son is he never met a stranger. He became very good friends with anybody he met in jail, not only those who were also in jail, but the folks who worked there. And he could tell me all about their kids and their wives and their favorite recipes. And Jim loved to grill, so it was an interesting adventure in that as well. Sadly, when he was 35, he had had 5 months of sobriety, and he picked up to use, and as it happens in many cases, he didn't anticipate the use correctly, and he died very suddenly. So my worst nightmares came true. One of my worst nightmares. I had, up to that time, I had written 3 eulogies and read them to him when I was really scared. And some people thought I was crazy, but it actually helped me a great deal and helped me bond with Jim, as he really understood how terrified I was at times. And it actually ended up helping me have few regrets. I think I'll always have regrets. Briefly, I'll tell you about my brother Bill. My brother Bill was murdered when he was 36. He had issues of his own, but mostly he was a relationship addict who also had substance problems. He had been doing extremely well and ran into a former girlfriend at a retreat, hooked up with her, and 2 weeks later he was gone. My niece Amanda died 2 years ago. She was 25, also struggled in her case with heroin, and when the struggle became too much after a rapid detox, she used a small handgun and ended her life. So our family has been radically impacted by substance-related issues in many ways. My son's death got some attention. My brother's got a little bit more. And then after Amanda's death, the family began to talk more about the issues of substances. Shifting now to one of the things that's been a great gift for me, as tragic as it is, and that's that over the years of going to Compassionate Friends meetings, regional conferences, national conferences, being referred to people through GriefNet and other resources, I have met so many moms and so many dads and aunts and uncles and nieces and cousins. And one of the things that I asked was, in addition to their stories, could I have a picture? Would they be willing to share a picture? All these stories, and I needed a face. So this is just some of the many, the hundreds of people who have shared with me pictures and stories of their children. And their losses have been for many different reasons and causes, all substance related. We've got Lance, who was an artist. We have Anka, who was a warrior person, just amazing person. Georgie, who loved to travel. Chris, who played the violin. Matthew, who was a drummer and chef. And the stories just go on and on and on about these amazing people that I've come to love. Now, this collection of pictures, by the way, does reside in my office. And I will tell you, I talk to them daily. I pray for everyone daily. They are part of my family, and they are also on my website. This is one of, this is on the new website, James Place. It shows you some of the pictures. On the Shadow the Stigma site, there's 5 panels of pictures. These happen to be all children that I have come to know through families and compassionate friends. In the middle is Lance. To the right of Lance on your screen is Peter. To the left of Lance is my son Jim. Anka. My niece is the dark-haired blonde about midway through, and my brother Bill is at the bottom. We've got Amy and Georgie and so many amazing people that are no longer with us. And just a quick note, in the middle of the screen You have support artists. This is an amazing work that's done. Artists in recovery do art, and people can purchase the art or just take a look at it. So I'm thrilled that they sponsor and help us in the work that we do. There are so many ways that we can lose people through a substance-related death. This is just the big ones that I hear all the time. It could be one-time only experiences such as binge drinking. It could be overdose, and these days overdoses are typically multiple substances. It's very rare that it's one substance today. There's various conditions that can arise as a result of using substances, endocarditis, which is often caused by sharing needles or using unclean needles, pancreatitis, which can come from drug-related and or alcohol-related usage, hepatitis, again, needle sharing or health-related issues, diseases such as HIV, AIDS, cancer, various cancers, certainly addiction, which I put addiction on there as a disease because that is how it's defined by the National Institutes of Drug Addiction through NIH. Certainly suicide, both accidental and intentional, are all too common. Murder is not unusual. Vehicular accidents, medical errors, methadone in particular is an area where we're losing so many people, and there's some wonderful resourcing for folks in that area. Experimenting. We have people that, I'll say kids, experiment. Sadly, we have a lot of parents that say, oh, it's no big deal. I did when I was that age. It's not the same in my personal opinion. We have many who don't know why their children, what the specific cause was, but it has been attributed to substance, even though there isn't a particular diagnosis through autopsy. I also put down that one of the causes is ignorance. Whether it's the user who doesn't know what they're getting into, which is very, very common, parent thinking that it's just cute, and I don't mean to be too silly about this, but somebody tries something once and they're told that it's no big deal. The quote here, forgive what hurt you, but never forget what it taught you. Each causation is something that can be studied in and of itself. And just a reminder that these are all painful deaths, but we can learn. We can come out of this if we so choose and get some information and help us with our sanity. So for me, these are just the kind of pathway that I took quite briefly. I immediately began, my husband and I, Tom, began immediately attending our local chapter of the Compassionate Friends. I wasn't sure how we would be received, but I realized that the pain of my loss was such that I would tolerate anything, and I have to say in my case, I was welcomed and made to feel welcome regardless. Then we began attending regional and national conferences, and that just changed our life in another whole dimension. Meeting up with parents from so many different walks of life, meeting the narcotic cop who couldn't save his daughter, the firemen, the mechanics, the everyday people, and those who were wealthy. And one person said to me, this doesn't happen in my family, we're educated and we're wealthy. And the tragedy is that there's no place to hide from this, from the issues of substances. Money, education, spiritual belief, nothing protects you when it comes to these types of losses. Eventually I began to network with people across the United States through various referrals and such, and today I am on Facebook. I'm on a site or on a one page that is for parents whose children are in recovery or working towards recovery, and then I'm on a site for those who are in recovery themselves, and I keep myself up to date and helping wherever I can. I began my process very much stuck in hopelessness. I figured nobody really cared if one more person who was addicted or using substances died, and I just felt that nobody was doing anything. Eventually I came across a report on the internet, and just reading the title, After the War on Drugs, literally set me back on my heels. I began to breathe. I began to feel hope. I hadn't even opened the report, but just the idea of this concept was enough to stir life in my heart. And so I began to read the report. I began reading books in a different way. Instead of books specifically for parents whose children have died for any reason, much less drug-related or substance-related, I began to research the laws and the history of the development of laws. I began to read books on research of addiction treatment and what was the history of addiction treatment. I was all over the internet, and I also began contacting authors of books, lawyers, and many of these were people who had been law enforcement who had become lawyers. I just reached out to figure I had nothing to lose, and I just began to see things in a much broader, bigger way. So the rage that I had felt of hopelessness and all that began to shift, and I began to have a goal. It took me a while, but I began to have a goal, something I could do with all of this angst, all of the 21 years of trying to keep my son alive, meeting other people whose kids had died from all kinds of causes. And the very first thing I did in 2007 was to put a wristband together. I woke up one morning and I've been looking for a slogan. And I came up out of a dream, and the wristband slogan was "No shame or blame, just love." And I thought, that's it. I don't know if anybody will want these, but I'm going to make some up and I'm going to take them to the TCF conference in Nashville. Well, I took 500 and I came home with none. And today I send out somewhere between 100 to 500 a week across the country, Canada, wherever anybody wants them. But then I began to realize that I had so much information that maybe I should share it. So I started to put together the website, Shout at the Stigma, and there's book reviews and web links, documentaries, all kinds of information. For me, the final stage of what to do with all of this information was what we call now James Place. And it came out of an odd circumstance. So those of you who know me know that I can go a little woo-woo. So those of you who don't do woo-woo, I'm just going to tell you, it's what I am on occasion. But I had this very strange experience the day after Jimmy's funeral. He was buried April 1st of 2003. The next day, my husband, my brother, and I were at the halfway house collecting his things. And walking across the parking lot, I had this vision. And it was an entry to a very large door. It had a sign that said James Place, and inside were people gathering, joyously greeting one another, and I wanted to be inside. And as I stepped across the threshold, the door shut, and I was back on that parking lot in Phoenix. I didn't know what it meant, and it took me years to figure out what that was. What it was is now we're in the process of establishing a nonprofit to raise scholarships for what we consider to be a hole in the system, which is treatment for those who suffer the disease of addiction or struggling with addiction. So that's where that's my process, and here I am. So I want to share quickly with you a couple of pieces of information. By the way, if you have questions, shoot them to Pat. She'll let me know. But there's some things that I found fascinating. Now, maybe this is information that is common to you, but it certainly wasn't to me. I never thought about how long addiction has been an issue in the world. And as I began to do the research, it really does unravel back to the 1500s. Very much one of, I will call, simplicity, of gluttony, obstinacy, reading too much. It migrated in the 1800s to overconsumption of alcohol and tobacco. But it's interesting that it was the 1800s when what we think of as use and abuse of substances really started to take shape. Interesting that it was the 1800s where there was an overprescribing of opium and morphine by doctors. Very much a similar issue that we have today and that we struggle with. 1800s again, alcohol abusers were referred to as the drunkards, and oftentimes with things like dipsomania or alcoholism. We move into things like opium, which was the first drug agent that was moving across the globe. It also was the reason that some of the current laws about drugs came into play. And it had to do with not with the drugs themselves, but not wanting to have the Chinese come into certain areas of the world. So it's an interesting dynamic that it wasn't about the drug, it was about social issues. We have, of course, then the development of morphine, and morphine became mass marketed in the 1820s. It's interesting to note, it's not on this particular slide, that from the Civil War, 44,000 men returned from Civil War addicted to morphine from battleground injuries. In 1853, the hypodermic needle syringe was invented, and this really kicked off a large amount of abusing prescription opium, morphine, and then later codeine and heroin. 1853. Very much centered in many cases in Europe, was centered in Europe for the most part, and I'll give you a little bit more information about that in just a second. The last bullet to me is one of the most shocking ones, is that when I learned that Sears and Roebuck did sell for a short period of time cocaine. So with your Sears catalog, you could order a cabin to build on your property, and you could also order an injection of cocaine. Now, I mentioned a couple of things here just as an FYI, Sigmund Freud and William Hallstatt. Most people know who Sigmund Freud is. Not everybody knows Hallstatt. Hallstatt was one of the 4 founding fathers of Johns Hopkins. He was a very famous surgeon. He was also massively addicted to morphine. In Hallstatt's case, or actually codeine to start, in Hallstatt's case, he was using anything he could to help with surgical procedures to numb individuals. He and Freud were in Vienna studying at the same medical center at the same time. Freud was not fond of needles, so he would use cocaine by sniffing it, and Hallstatt would inject it. And he was doing it from a medical point of view, became massively addicted, and lived his whole life addicted to cocaine and morphine, but did amazing things being supported by a medical system to supply him with medical grade product. And he really is known as the founding father of modern day surgery. And of course, Freud is very famous for what he did in psychoanalysis. Some people may not know that heroin was sold over the counter by the Bayer Company, yes, the ones who bring us Bayer aspirin, until 1914, and was one of the reasons why the FDA was formed when they took it off the market. Some of you may know or may not know, but there was a place called the Narcotic Farm in Lexington, Kentucky, and there's a wonderful documentary that I wish we could get access to. I have a copy that talks about how they decided to put people into treatment rather than into prison. And that operated until 1971, when the farm was closed down and it was moved to Baltimore, Maryland, and the name was changed to the National Institutes for Drug Abuse. And that's how the NIDA came about. A couple of quick comments I want to make about denial. And there's what I call denial of the small d, where we absolutely just don't know. When we don't know what we don't know, it's a kind of a cone, if you will. How do we know what we don't know? We hold ourselves so responsible that we should have known better, how could we have known better, but we beat ourselves up for it. And I like to differentiate that from the big D, denial. When we know that the elephant is storming around the house, somebody is acting out, alcoholism is prevalent, or drug abuse is used, and we turn blind eye, That's different than if we just don't know and we don't have the awareness. And I want to encourage people to remember, to think about, if you didn't know and you're in small d, if you don't know, you don't know. It isn't always an elephant necessarily storming around the house. So just a quick comment about that. I want to differentiate here for a moment between stigma and shame. Stigma is just what you might expect. It is more of an intellectual construct. It's an idea where someone makes it, or a group makes a decision that a particular thing is disgraceful, it's inappropriate, but it is an intellectual decision. And it's very different than an emotional issue, but I'll go back to that in a second. So in stigma, someone judges another on a personal trait. They have leprosy, they have a physical disability, they don't like their sexual orientation, they are mentally ill, they don't like their skin color. Lots of reasons why we'll establish a stigma that may not have an emotional component, but has more of a mental component to it. We have made a decision that that is not appropriate, and so we've stigmatized. And there are people who are stigmatized for being beautiful and wealthy. But essentially, stigma is somebody is bad to the core and therefore doesn't deserve our respect. Now, shame, on the other hand, is an emotion, and this is energy in motion. The self, the individual, is perceived as defective, damaged, gets confused with guilt. But I want you to look, if you will, at that third item. Very often, people who have experienced traumatic events blame themselves. And when that happens, whether it's for whatever reason they have a traumatic experience, they want to hide, disappear, or even die. And this often does lead to abuse, use of substances. It can be food, it can be overeating, it can be any number of things. It isn't necessarily alcohol, drugs in particular. There can be a positive use of shame in teaching values of the family. So shame isn't always bad. It's really more complicated kind of than that. But shame is attached to behaviors, not to the person, whereas stigma, different story. So shame comes from the inside, where one blames oneself for not being able to change. I can't change the color of my skin. I can't change that I have a mental illness. I really can't change that I'm an addict. Stigma is that which is applied from the outside in, where society points to us and say, well, you're this, therefore you are less than. So when you add the two together, you really have a situation that's very, very difficult to deal with. And that's kind of putting it mildly. I want to make a point here about stigma and shame and how they play together. And you'll have to ignore that phone ringing. Oh, somebody got it. Thank you. So if we look at it, shame coming from the inside, we could, if we wanted to work on this, if we were willing to work on this, we could do some therapy. We can get active in a spiritual program or whatever might work for us. Stigma comes from the outside. So we work with that differently. We talk with other people who have similar stigma or stigmatized. We learn that what the value is or isn't, and that's why calls like tonight are so important. Sticking together with other people so we can come to understand that the stigma doesn't need to be applied. We can push it to the side and honor the truth about our kids. One of my least favorite comments, and one that I think of in this case, is when someone said to me, "But you don't look like the mother of an addict." Well, I'm not sure what that would be. But again, we're talking about stigma placed on an individual that it feeds the development of shame. So if we want to make a difference, we want to start by understanding the basic information of the differences between shame, stigma, and how denial plays in. Now I want to run through a couple of quick things. I'm a fanatical reader. These are my favorites. Everybody picks up what's important to you, and I'm so grateful for so many people who have shared with me what they like. So I've read a lot. I read constantly. These are ones that I pick up. In the realm of hungry ghosts, close encounters with addiction, Gabor Mate is a doctor up in Canada, Vancouver area. It's a very thick book. I don't recommend that you have to read it from cover to cover. You could pick up any chapter and read it, but it's the most compassionate and the most technically detailed I've ever come across that isn't written like a medical book, and very compassionate. An Anatomy of Addiction, Sigmund Freud, William Halstead, and the Miracle Drug Cocaine by Howard Markle. Howard is a medical historian and a doctor. I should have put MD after his name. My bad. It's an excellent historical review of addiction in general, specifically using the stories of Freud and Halstead and the development of cocaine as it was brought over to Europe and then around the world. The Lost Years, Surviving a Mother and Daughter's Worst Nightmare. Christina and her mother, Constance, wrote one chapter for Christina, who was a recovering addict, who's now an interventionist, and Constance was writing it from her perspective of the mother with an out-of-control teenager. And it's one of the most beautiful books I've read, both sides of the story simultaneously. Honorable Intentions, An Odyssey of an American Warrior. Russell was a policeman, a DEA agent who lived undercover in Latin America for many years, came to see that the war on drugs was not making a difference, and it's an excellent read from that point out, from the interior out. Tweak, Growing Up on Methamphetamines by Nick Sheff. Nick is a amphetamine addict in recovery. His father wrote the book Beautiful Boy. What I like about Tweak and what I would like to offer to people is if you want to get inside the body and the mind of someone dealing, especially with the amphetamines, but truly just about anything, Nick does a very good job of translating that so that you get a sense of being on the inside. The last book that I have on my top 5 list is Painkiller, and Barry Meyer is an award-winning author who wrote this book about the development of Oxycontin and how it came into the American society, actually, and worth the read. A couple of things that I do recommend also is some documentaries. There is nothing simple about drugs of legal or illegal substance in this world. It's not simple. It's incredibly complex. If you never think about the farmer in Tajikistan who gives his daughter to a bank, essentially, in exchange for a loan so that he can buy seeds and fertilizer for a crop that will feed his children and family, the crop being poppies, you wouldn't think about that. But raw opium gives you one of the best views of the whole breadth of these issues of substances across the globe. And you can watch it online, very inexpensive, and just a little over an hour. If you think wealth is a deterrent to drug use, the Behind the Orange Curtain is an excellent documentary that you can order. It's, I think, $10 or maybe $20. Beautifully done in Orange County. A lot of kids talking about their experiences. Same thing true of Overtaken, this documentary. That documentary is 30 minutes, all young adults saying, I didn't think it could happen to me. Really excellent for the young ones. And if you can find the documentary on the narcotic farm, it's just a fascinating history of how doctors back in the 30s got addicts together, and on Friday night, Saturday night, they were jamming because there were a lot of jazz musicians, and then they reinfected them once they had gotten recovered and what they learned from that. So a lot of history here. One of the things that really gets to me when we think about it is what this slide shows you. What we lose. When we lose our children, our siblings, our grandchildren, we lose so much talent to our society. We lose the ones we love that we want to hug and touch. We lose the folks that were funny, our loved ones that were funny, that were clever, that were wonderful to grill things in the house or to repair things, and all the personal stuff that's so important to us. But we also lose, society loses. Society loses a huge chunk of talent. Our friend Nancy, her son Lance was an artist, and she was just recently able to produce a film that he had died. It was incomplete when he died. But this goes on, and you all have your stories and what was lost. So I want to ask, what are you doing for you? And these are just some suggestions that I have, that I found for myself and talking to others, what they found helpful. I'm going to start and end with this. Trust your love for your child, for your sibling or your grandchild, and talk about them. My friend Margot's son, who I helped her raise, was murdered 10 years before my son died. When Jimmy died, she and her husband were there for me, for Tom and I. And I would talk about Jim a lot, and she said, I don't talk about Greg because it upsets people. And I said, you've lost a child, and yet you're trying to keep the person who hasn't lost a child from being upset? And she got angry, and now she talks about Greg more. That's why we go to gatherings, whether it's Compassionate Friends, whether it's some other group that suits your needs appropriately. So I encourage you to trust the love that you have for the person that you lost and talk about them. People don't die. I mean, I'm very verbose, so I talk about, my loved ones and stories that others have shared with me. So I encourage you to do the same. I also encourage you to take care of yourself over and over and over. I hear from parents every single day, 7 days a week. And what I hear a lot is not taking care of themselves. If you don't take care of you, you're not in position to take care of the remembrances of your loved ones you've lost and those that are still here. I encourage you to get educated. I'm a nut. I like to read. I'm fascinated by this. I'm a little bit obsessive about it. Okay, guilty. Read what works for you. Let the rest go. Find a group that suits you. My dear friend Rhea out of Marietta is very involved with Friends Don't Let Friends Die. Everybody's got something specific that they can hook into. Of course, I'm biased. I really enjoy our Compassionate Friends organization, and that suits me also. But then there are subgroups within that meet specific needs that I need. Plant a tree. Set up a scholarship. If there's something that your loved one was very connected to, it doesn't have to be a huge amount. It can be some of the things I love. So many folks have written books, and that's great. That's one way. My friend Rich, Kristen's dad, has written a book for Kristen, but it's for the family. It's not to be published at this point. It's for the family so that they can remember Kristen, and it helped him to work on his own processing of Kristen's loss, his beautiful daughter. Finish a project like Nancy did for Lance. His video link, Time's Up, is on my website. So if you go to the Shadow the Stigma website, you can click right to the YouTube link and watch it. It was a wonderful process for Nancy to go through, very healing. Testify. Yes, or a couple days ago, a new friend of mine, Sally, testified in Kansas on a law that was being reviewed. And she emailed me last night that, in fact, they passed the law, and she's very excited because in her son Ryan's memory, she has changed something important to her. So you don't have to do a whole lot. Talk about your children. If you want to do something big, great. You want to do something little, fabulous. I love this quote from Helen Keller. When one door closes, another opens. We've all heard that. But often we look so long, regretfully, upon the closed door, we fail to see the one that is opened for us. I choose to believe our children are healed, our loved ones are healed, they're helping others, they're with us, they're present to us. What doors are they opening? I love this idea. What are we not seeing? Whether your energy is big or your energy is little, your resources are big or little, it doesn't matter. Plant a flower. Tell somebody, that they look nice. Give somebody the right of way. Anything that you can do honors your children. So this is where I get really teary, which I do a lot anyway. These are my loved ones. My son Jim, as he stood up for my husband when we got married. Tom is Jim's stepdad, and they were very close. This is Amanda, gorgeous Amanda. This is my brother Bill. And also I have on here the slide Jessie and John Roger. Jessie is the baby girl that I lost when Jimmy was 5, never came to birth, and John Roger is the brother that died at birth that I lost when I was a young child. And I grew up with our ghost brother, John. So this is why I do what I do, because these are amazing, amazing energies. They're spirits, they're souls, they matter to me. They fought hard for life. No matter how they died, they're my heroes because they really worked hard to have a life. So these are my 5 candles in a moonlit sky. Because I've given you a fair amount of information, to say the least, there's a lot more out there on my websites. And I also like this quote at the bottom. You'll see, a positive attitude may not solve all your problems, but it will annoy enough people to make it worth the effort. I do think a sense of humor is so important. So anyway, these is where you can get more information. Obviously, my 2 websites, the Compassionate Friends has got just scads of information. And I'm going to see what questions we might have now.
Thank you, Barbara. That great presentation. We've had a couple people asking about the books, so I want to mention again that you said your slides would be available from your website. Is that right?
The list, the slides are available on the website.
Okay, great.
Yeah, the books on the website, on my Shadow the Stigma website. If you go under books, you will be able to link to the websites for the authors to get more information. But on the PDF that I have on my website, it's listed under news links, and it will just show you what you have right here.
Okay,
so
great.
You can get information, this and a ton of other books.
Okay. Time for some questions here. The problem we have with our son is when he was around 14, he was extremely depressed, and that's why he started using. We lived in a rural area, and there were no services available without driving a minimum of an hour. And even then, there was no mental health services for teens. What can be done to help others in that situation?
I think that's a great question. It's ironic to me, on one hand, that when I speak to addiction therapists, they tell me that there's an overabundance of therapists available and resources. And I hear this all the time, that they're remote, they can't get access to things. I'm not sure that I really have an effective answer right at the top of my head, Pat.
Okay.
I will say that because not only accessibility, but also resources, money, insurance to pay for that. You can be right in the middle of a city and be lacking in resources. One of the things that we're constantly doing is finding resources, those that can provide other scholarships and resources, and also organizations that are offering counseling that is done over the phone. that's a tough one. That's really tough because so much of the stuff you want to be doing in person. So I don't know that I could really be fair with that answer.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. A lot of the questions we have deal with guilt. They could have done something to prevent, made a difference in their lives if they would have done this or that. And that's what a lot of the questions are about. I know that we're running out of time, so do you want to address the
Yeah.
guilt that people feel when their child
Guilt is
dies?
it's a very, very common. Absolutely. I shoulda, coulda, woulda. And if only I had, and all of that. That's part of the process that we all go through. And, me too. I look at it this way. I have a very powerful spiritual belief system. I believe in something greater than myself. And when I think about how that which is greater than myself is not capable of stopping planes crashing, boats sinking, big things, I have to remember that if what I pray to with can't stop big things, why am I thinking I should have been able to, see something? So I sometimes have to ask myself, why do I think I am so over all knowing, all powerful, all wise? And that helps me put my guilt into perspective, that we do the best we can. And it's very difficult. This is something I think we all work on and struggle with. If only I had slowed down here, if only. But I believe that when we give ourselves the right to be humans, that we did, I love the Maya Angelou, we did the best we could at the time, and when we knew better, we did better. I also choose to believe that on some grander scale that I don't know about, our children are teachers. They've taught us, even in the most harsh way, about ourself, our own resilience, and we can still do something with our lives. So I respect that guilt is there. I do believe we need to look at how powerful were we really, are we really, and forgive ourselves. And that's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not. And it's a universal problem for bereaved parents, right? Not just...
It doesn't matter why you lost your child. When I lost Jesse, the doctors gave me medications that were inappropriate, and they misdiagnosed me. I still blame myself for 30 years until I got some more education, and I realized, so it is universal. It doesn't matter what the circumstance. And I want to honor everyone who is part of this tonight, who may listen to this webinar in the future, for stepping out perhaps of the comfort zone, for whatever that you're doing, to just love yourself and love your children. And I choose to believe that our kids are loving us back, that they're in a good place. I believe personally that they're all whole and helping in ways that we can't even begin to comprehend. And there's whole raft of books written about that too.
It's a great note to leave it on, Barb. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Been a great webinar. This webinar has been recorded and will be archived after it's processed on the Compassionate Friends website, www.compassionatefriends.org. Some of our upcoming webinars include Death of a Child by Suicide, Pregnancy and Infant Loss, and How Can I Help When a Child Dies. Watch the Compassionate Friends website for the dates of these important webinars. Thank you again, Barb, and good night. And good night, everyone, and be well. Good night.
Good night, Pat. Good night, everybody.